my name is Sophia. I am 9 years old, and today I'm going to read you Roald Dahl, Fantastic Mr. Fox, illustrated by Quentin Blake, Puffin Books. Chapter 1. The Three Farmers. Down in the valley, there were 3 farms. The owners of these farms had done well. They were rich men. They were also nasty men. All 3 of them were about as nasty and mean as any men you could meet. Their names were Farmer Boggis, Farmer Bunce, and Farmer Bean. Boggis was a chicken farmer. He kept thousands of chickens. He was enormously fat. This was because he ate 3 boiled chickens smothered with dumplings every day for breakfast, lunch, and supper. Bunce was a duck and goose farmer. He kept thousands of ducks and geese. He was kind of pot-billed dwarf. He was so short his chin would have been underwater in the shallow end of any swimming pool in the world. His food was dough nuts and goose livers. He mashed the livers into a disgusting paste and then stuffed the paste into the donuts. This diet gave him a tummy ache and a beastly temper. Bean was a turkey and apple farmer. He kept thousands of turkeys in an orchard full of apple trees. He never ate any food at all. Instead, he drank gallons of strong cider, which he made from the apples in his orchard. He was as thin as a pencil and cleverest of them all. Boggis, Bunce, and Bean, one fat, one short, one lean, these horrible crooks, so different in looks, were none the less equally mean. That is what the children round about used to sing when they saw them. Chapter 2. Mr. Fox. Hill above the valley there was a wood. In the wood there was a huge tree. Under the tree there was a hole. In the hole lived Mr. Fox and Mrs. Fox and their 4 small foxes. Every evening, as soon as it got dark, Mr. Fox would say to Mrs. Fox, "Well, my darling, what shall it be this time? A plump chicken from Boggis, a duck or a goose from Bunce, or a nice turkey from Bean?" And when Mr. Fox had told him what she wanted, Mr. Fox would creep down into the valley in the darkness of the night and help himself. Boggis and Bunce and Bean knew very well what was going on, and it made them wild with rage. They were not men who liked to give anything away. Less still, didn't they like anything to be stolen from them. So every night, each of them would take his shotgun and hide in a dark place somewhere on our own farm, hoping to catch the robber. But Mr. Fox was too clever for them. He always approached a farm with the wind blowing in his face, and this meant that if any men were lurking in the shadows ahead, the wind would carry the smell of that man to Mr. Fox's nose from far away. Thus, Mr. Boggis was hiding behind his chicken house number 1. Mr. Fox would smell him out from 50 yards and quickly change direction, hiding for chicken house number 4 at the other end of the farm. "Dang and blast that lousy beast!" cried Boggis. "I'd like to rip his guts out," said Bunce. "He must be killed," cried Bean. "But how?" said Boggis. "How on earth can we catch the blighter?" Bean picked his nose delightfully. With a long finger, "I have a plan," he said. "You've never had a Kent plan yet," said Buns. "Shut up and listen," said Bean. "Tomorrow night we will all hide just outside the hole where the fox lives. We will wait there until he comes out. Then bang, 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 bang." "Very clever," said Buns, "but first we shall have to find the hole." My dear Buns, I have already found it," said the crafty Bean. "It's up in the wood on the hill. It's under a large, huge tree." Chapter 3. The Shooting. "Well, my darling," said Mr. Fox, "what shall it be tonight?" "I think we'll have a duck tonight," said Mrs. Fox. "Bring us 2 fat ducks, if you please, 1 for you and me, and 1 for the children." "Ducks it shall be," said Mr. Fox. "Buns best." "Now, do be careful," said Mrs. Fox. "My darling," said Mr. Fox, "I can smell those goons a mile away. I can even smell one from the other. Pockets give off a filthy stink of rotten chicken skins. Buns reeks of goose livers, and as for Bean, the sums of apple cider hang around him like poisonous gases." "Yes, but just don't get careless," said Mrs. Fox. "You know they'll be waiting for you, all 3 of them." "Don't worry about me," said Mr. Fox. "I'll see you later." But Mr. Fox would not have been quite so cocky had he known exactly where the 3 farmers were waiting at that moment. They were just outside the entrance to the hole, each one crouching behind a tree with his gun loaded. And what is more, they had chosen their positions very carefully, making sure that the wind was not blowing from them towards the fox hole. In fact, it was blowing in the opposite direction. There was no chance of them being smelled out. Mr. Fox crept up the dark tunnel to the mouth of his hole. He poked his long, handsome face out into the night air and sniffed once. He moved an inch or 2 forward and stopped. He sniffed again. He was always especially careful when coming out from his hole. He inched forward a little more. The front half of his body was now in the open. His black nose twitched from side to side, sniffing and sniffing for the scent of danger. He found none, and he was just about to go trotting forward into the wood when he heard, or thought he heard, a tiny noise, a soft rustling sound. I thought someone had moved a foot ever so gently through a patch of dry leaves. Mr. Fox flattened his body against the ground and lay very still, his ears perked. He waited a long time, but he heard nothing more. It must have been a field mouse, he told himself, or some other small animals. He crept a little further out of the hole, then further still. He was almost right out in the open now. He took a last careful look around. The wood was murky and very still. Somewhere in the sky, the moon was shining. Just then, his sharp night eyes caught a glimpse on something bright behind the tree not far away. It was a small silver speck of moonlight shining on a polished surface. Mr. Fox lay low, watching it. What on earth was it? Now it was moving. It was coming up and up. Great heavens! It was the barrel of a gun. Quick as a whip, Mr. Fox jumped back into his hole. And at that same instant, the entire wood seemed to explode around him. Bang, bang! Bang, bang! Bang, bang! The smoke from the 3 guns floated upward in the night air. Buggins and Bunts and Bean came out from behind their trees and walked toward the hole. Did we get him? Said Bean. One of them shone a flashlight on the hole. And there on the ground, in the circle of light, half and half out of the hole, lay the poor toweled, blood-stained remains of a fox's tail. Bean picked it up. We got the tail, but we missed the fox, he said, tossing the thing away. Dang and blast, said Bogus. We shot too late. We should have let fly the moment he poked his head out. He wouldn't be poking it out again in a hurry, Bun said. Bean pulled a flask from his pocket and took a swing of cider. Then he said, "It's take 3 days at least before he gets hungry enough to come out again. I'm not sitting around here waiting for it, Dad. Let's dig him out." Said Bogus. "Now you're talking sense. We can dig him out in a couple of hours. We know he's there." "I reckon there's a whole family of them down that hole," Bun said. "Then we'll have the lot," said Bean. "Get the shovels." Chapter 4. The Terrible Shovels. Down in the hole, Mrs. Fox was terribly licking the stump of Mr. Fox's tail to stop bleeding. It was the finest tail for miles around, she said between licks. "It hurts," said Mr. Fox. "I know it does, sweetheart, but it'll soon get better, and it will soon grow again, Dad," said one of the foxes. "It will never grow again," said Mr. Fox. "I shall be tailless for the rest of my life." He looked very glum. There was no food for the foxes that night, and soon the children dozed off. Then Mr. Fox dozed off, but Mr. Fox couldn't sleep because of the pain in the stump of his tail. "Well," he thought, "I suppose I'm lucky to be alive at all. And now they're flying our hole. We're going to have to move out as soon as possible. Well, we will never get any peace if we..." What was that? He turned his head sharply and listened. The noise he heard now was the most frightening noise a fox can ever hear. The scrape, scrape, scraping of the shovels digging into the soil. "Wake up!" he shouted. "They're digging us out." Mrs. Fox was wide awake. In 1 second, she sat up, quivering all over. "Are you sure that's it?" she whimpered. "I'm positive. Listen." "They'll kill my children," cried Mrs. Fox. "Never," said Mr. Fox. "But, darling, they will," sobbed Mrs. Fox. "You know they will." Scratch, scratch, scratch went the shovels above their heads. Small stones and bits of earth began falling from the roof of the tunnel. "How will they kill us, Mommy?" asked one of the small foxes. His round black eyes were huge with fright. Will there be dogs?" he said. Mrs. Fox began to cry. She gathered her 4 children close to her and held them tight. Suddenly, there was an especially loud crunch above their heads, and the sharp end of a shovel came right through the ceiling. The sight of this awful thing seemed to have an electric effect upon Mr. Fox. He jumped up and shouted, "I've got it! Come on! There's not a moment to lose. Why didn't I think of it before?" "Think of what, Dad?" "A fox can dig quicker than a man," shouted Mr. Fox, beginning to dig. "Nobody in the world can dig as quick as a fox." The soil began to fly out furiously behind Mrs. Fox, and as he started to dig for dear life with his front feet, Mrs. Fox ran toward to help him. So did the 4 children. "Go downwards," ordered Mr. Fox. "We've got to go deep as we possibly can." The tunnel began to grow deep longer and longer. It sloped steeply downward, deeper and deeper. Below the surface of the ground it went. The mother and the father and all 4 of the children were digging together. Their front legs were moving so fast you couldn't see them, and gradually the scrunching and scraping of the shovels became fainter and fainter. After about an hour, Mr. Fox stopped digging. "Hold it," he said. They all stopped. They turned and looked back up the long tunnel they had just dug. All was quiet. "Phew," said Mr. Fox. "I think we've done it. They'll never get as deep as this. Well done, everyone." They all sat, panting for breath, and Mrs. Fox, to her children, "I should like you to know that if it wasn't for your father, we should all be dead by now. Your father is a fantastic fox." Mr. Fox looked at his wife, and she smiled. He loved her more than ever when she said things like that. Chapter 5. The Terrible Tractors. As the sun rose the next morning, Bogus and Buns and Bean were still digging. They had dug a hole so deep you could have put a house into it. But they had not yet come to the end of the fox's tunnels. They were all very tired and cross. "Dang and blast," said Bogus. "Whose rotten idea was this?" "Bean's idea," said Buns. Bogus and Buns both started at Bean. Bean took another swing of cider, then put his flask back into his pocket. Without offering it to the others, "Listen," he said angrily. "I want that fox. I'm going to get that fox. I'm not giving in till I'm strung him up over my front porch, dead as a dumpling. We can get him by digging, that's for sure," said the fat Doggess. "I've had enough digging." Buns, the little pot beware dwarf, looked at Bean and said, "Have you got any more stupid ideas then?" "What?" said Bean. "I can't hear you." Bean never took a bath. He never even washed. As a result, his ear holes were clogged with all kinds of muck and wax and bits of chewing gum and dead flies and stuff like that. This was him deaf. "Speak louder," said to Buns, and Buns shouted back, "Got any more stupid ideas?" Bean rubbed the back of his neck with a dirty finger. He had a boil coming there, and it itched. "What we need on these jobs," he said, "is machines, mechanical shovels. We'll have him out in 5 minutes with mechanical shovels. This was a pretty good idea, and the other two had to admit it. All right then, Bean said, taking charge. Bogus, you stay here and see the foxes doesn't escape. Buns and I will go and fetch our missionary. If he tries to get out, shoot him quick. The long, thin Bean walked away. The tiny Buns trotted after him. The Bogus stayed where he was with his gun, pointing at the foxhole. Soon, 2 enormous caterpillar tractors with mechanical shovels on their front ends came clanking into the woods. Bean was driving one, Buns the other. The machines were both black. They were murderous, brutal-looking monsters. Here we go then, shouted Bean. Death to the fox, shouted Bun. The machines went to work, beating huge mouthfuls of soil out of the hill. The big tree under which Mr. Fox had dug his hole in the first place was toppled like a matchstick. On all sides, rocks were sent flying, and trees were falling, and the noise was deafening. Down in the tunnel, the foxes crouched listening to the terrible changing and banging overhead. What's happening, Dad? Cried the small foxes. What are they doing? Mr. Fox didn't know what was happening or what they were doing. It's an earthquake, cried Mrs. Fox. Look, said one of the small foxes, our tunnel got shorter. I can't see the daylight. They all looked round, and yes, the mouth of the tunnel was only a few feet away from them now, and in the circle of daylight beyond, they could see the 2 huge black tractors be almost on top of them. Tractors! Shouted Mr. Fox. And mechanical shovels. Dig for your life! Dig, dig, dig! Chapter 6. The Race. Now there began a desperate race, the machines against the foxes. In the beginning, the hill looked like this. After about an hour, as the machine sped away, more and more soil from the hilltop, it looked like this. Sometimes the foxes would gain a little ground, and clanking noises would grow fainter, and Mr. Foxes would say, We're going to make it. I'm sure we were. But then a few moments later, the machines would come back at them, and crunch of the mighty shovels would get louder and louder. Once the foxes actually saw the sharp metal edge of one of the shovels as it scraped up the earth just behind them. Keep going, my darlings, panted Mr. Fox. Don't give up. Keep going, the fat Bogus shouted to Buns and Bean. We'll get him any moment now. Have you caught sight of them? Bean called back. Not yet, shouted Bogus. But I think you're close. I'll pick him up with my bucket, shouted Buns. I'll chop him to pieces. But by lunchtime, the machines were still at it. And so were the poor foxes. The hill now looked like this. The farmers didn't stop for lunch. They were too keen to finish the job. Hey, there, Mr. Fox, yelled Buns, leaning out of his tractor. We're coming to get you. You've had been your last chicken, yelled Bogus. You'll never come prowling around my farm again. A sort of madness had taken hold of the 3 men. The tall skinny Bean and drawfish peeled Buns was driving their machines like mechanics. racing the motors and making the shovels dig at a terrific speed. The fat Bogus was hopping about like the fish, shoutings, "Faster! Faster!" By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, this is what had happened to the hill. The hole the machines had dug was like the tractor of a volcano. It was such an enormous sight that crowds of people came rushing out from the surrounding villages to look at it. They stood on the edge of the crater and stared down at Bogus and Buns and Bean. "Hey there, Bogus! What's going on?" "We're after Fox. We must be mad." The people jeered and laughed, but this only made the three farmers more furious and more obstinate and more determined than ever not to give up until they have caught the fox. Chapter 7. We'll never let him go. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Bean switched off the motor of his tractor and climbed down from the driving seat. Bunce did the same. Both men had had enough. They were tired and stiff from the driving the tractors all day. They were also hungry. Slowly, they walked over to the small foxhole in the bottom of the huge crater. Bean's face was purple with rage. Bunce was cursing the fox with dirty words that cannot be printed. Bogus came waddling up. "Dang and blast that fiddling skin fox," he said. "What the heck do we do now?" "I'll tell you what we don't do," Bean said. "We don't let him go." "We'll never let him go," Bunce glared. "Never, never, never," said Bogus. "Did you hear that, Mr. Fox?" yelled Bean, bending low and shouting down the hole. "It's not over yet, Mr. Fox. We're not going home till we've strung you up dead as a dingbat." Whereupon the three men all shook hands with one another and swore a solemn oath that they would not go back to their farms until the fox was caught. "What's the next move?" asked Bunce, the pot-billed dwarf. "We're sending you down the hole to fetch him up," said Bean. "Down you go, you miserable midget." "Not me!" screamed Bunce, running away. Bean made a sickly smile. When he smiled, you saw his scuttled gun. You saw more guns than teeth. "Then there's only one thing to do," he said. "We starve him out. We camp here today, day and night, watching the hole. He'll come out in the end. He'll have to." So Bogus and Bunce and Bean sent messages down to their farmer asking for tents, sleeping bags, and supper.